Hello. Are we live?
We
I think we
are.
are.
Participants are flooding in.
Yeah, great. I'll just introduce people. So welcome to this Mohawk Hudson Land Conservancy vendor Melon Farm discussion about the survey that we had. We got a lot of responses to. We're just going to give people a few more minutes to join, and then we'll introduce the crew here and the committee and talk about the survey. And I'll mention this again too, but we're recording this webinar, and we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers, and we'll go through that. Here's an opening poll in progress. So what we're doing also is asking people where they're located right now. And if you would just tell us where you're viewing us from, just give us a good idea of where people are located, and we'll show you the results in a couple of minutes, and we'll give it another minute just for people to sign on, but and then we'll get underway. We are not using the chat function. We're instead using the Q&A for questions, and we'll get to as many answers as we can, during and after the presentation tonight. And again, we'll remind people of that again. Not using the chat, instead we're using the Q&A. And this is being recorded. We'll give the poll another minute, and then we'll look at the answers and get a sense also of how many people are tuning in. Yep.
So I see a lot of familiar names in the attendee list. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. There's about 23 attendees on right now. We had about 54 people register, so we'll just give folks a minute to log in. And again, there's an opening poll. Just answer once of where you're joining us from today, so we have an idea. Right now, I'll send the poll results out in just a second, but we've got about 42% of attendees from the town of New Scotland. Not surprising, because that's where our project is located. Second runner-up is the town of Bethlehem with 37%. And we also have attendees from the town of Guilderland and the city of Albany as well. So thanks so much for joining us.
Nice. It's good. So yeah, let's talk about the poll results. Just, I think Sarah went over it, and they haven't changed much. Most town of New Scotland and town of Bethlehem, with some Guilderland and Albany. Terrific. So I'll introduce the people on the who are on tonight, and we I think Mark and Sarah really created a little committee to really focus on this property, the vendor property. The committee is, I'm Charlie Krasansky. I live in New Salem, town of New Scotland, and I'm on the board of Mohawk Hudson Land Conservancy. Nan Stolzenberg, not here tonight. She's principal planner and community. She's the principal planner of Community Planning and Environmental Associates. John Price, also not here tonight, project manager and ecologist with Resource Environmental Solutions. Adam Yagelski's here tonight. He'll talk later. He's a resident of the town of Knox. He's a preserve steward for Mohawk Hudson Land Conservancy and director of planning and zoning for the town of East Greenbush in Rensselaer County. Sarah Walsh. She's the conservation director for Mohawk Hudson Land Conservancy. And Mark King, you'll hear from later as well. He's the executive director of Mohawk Hudson Land Conservancy. So we're recording the session tonight. We're not using the chat, we're using the Q&A. So put your questions in there. We just thought we'd go over some of the survey results. we summarized those, and we want to discuss them and appreciate all of the information we've gathered, and we're going to go over the highlights. We, just as many of you are interested in this, this is a special property, big project for Mohawk Hudson Land Conservancy. A lot of people interested in it, just given where it is, and of course, people have been using the rail trail, more than ever when this pandemic hit. Commuting, just being outside, and it seems the timing of this couldn't have been better. I think people just instinctively could sense that the development pressure in and around this, property really is, just speaks for how important this land is. You see the houses going up, and then the census data confirmed what we already saw, and that is the town of New Scotland is the fastest growing town in Albany County. And so this, this property is just really, so well situated and important. And I think that was just what we saw, just, from people who came through and helped preserve this, and now interested in what happens to it and with it. We introduced the Bender Melon Farm Committee, and 4 of us are on tonight. We're going to talk about the property with a story map, it's called, that shows in detail the sections of it and why it's divided up in those ways, and then the process of what happens next, what's happening now and what happens next. We'll go through the survey results. There'll be a poll question or 2 later. We'll talk about what we've learned, and then also we'll get into next steps. But and along the way, we'll answer questions if you put them in the Q&A. We'll get into the survey. There were 336 responses, pretty good, and a lot of them we left a lot of room in there, also for not just answering simple questions, but giving people a chance to elaborate, and that was some of the best parts of it, were what we've learned from people who explained or answered questions that we weren't asking directly. And so the first one was, how did you hear about this project? And we were surprised at some of the answers to this part of the survey as well, with the road signs.
Okay, I'm going to pick up from here. This is Mark King, and I want to welcome everyone, and also thank you for joining us, and thank you for your interest and support of this project. This is the biggest, well, I would say the most expensive. We've protected bigger land, but this is the most expensive project we've ever taken on. And we closed on the property in 2020 after about an 18-month fundraising campaign that obviously was quite successful. So the property, I'm sure everyone knows, you're located at the corner of 85 and 85A. For people who are very local, this is right next to the new Fred the Butcher shop and the old Stonewell Plaza. And it's an area with a lot of history, both in terms of agricultural history and the Bender Melon farm that was located there from about the 1860s onward. And then later it became the Taylor farm after Charles Bender retired from a very successful career of growing melons on the property. One thing I'll address right off is why don't we grow melons out there? That was not a question in our survey, but I think it's one we've been asked a number of times. And the answer to that is that it's extraordinarily difficult to grow melons in this area. So we don't see a future of melons, but we do see a lot of other ideas and a lot of other possibilities for the property. One of the ways we were successful with this project is that we applied for a grant called an REDC grant, a Regional Economic Development Council grant. And that we were successful in securing that grant, but a part of that process required us to come up with a vision for the property and how we might use the various areas. And so this map you're seeing before you is is that vision. And we hope this doesn't constrain people's thinking, and these lines are bound to change, and the activities that will take place in the various areas are bound to be adjusted as we learn more and as we get further into the project. But this is the basic framework that we provided with the grant, and I think it will largely guide how we work on the property. One of the things I wanted to also point out, so this property was the site of a pretty significant local land use controversy. Some folks that are local probably know of the big box fight, and that came about when there was a proposal for a development of the property and a threat. I'm not sure how realistic the threat was, but a threat of Target or Walmart or another big box type store coming in. So when that went away, things settled down and the town rezoned the area, but it didn't preserve the property. And so that's when we acted and actually acquired the land to determine its future and have you all help us do that. I also wanted to point out the Captain Joseph Hilton Town Park in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. This is a project that Mohawk Hudson also took on, and it was a result of the town of New Scotland reaching out to us when the Hilton Barn was about to be torn down. And the Hilton Barn was located right across the street, a little bit north of where the word Captain Joseph is. The town called us and said, hey, we'd like to relocate the barn. Got any ideas? We got to work and found that the Hilton family still owned across the street, and were successful in acquiring an acre of land to move the barn to. And then subsequently, we were able to acquire 15 more acres, which we deeded over to the town with restriction as a town park. I point that out because you may drive by the site and see the Hilton Barn roof being done. That's being done under another REDC grant by the town of New Scotland, and they own the barn and they own the park. We did all those things prior to our successful acquisition of the Bender Melon property. So I did want to point out that bit of history, and we're very cooperatively working with the town of New Scotland currently for the access to our property because they have the best access from that park. So that's a little bit of history on the site. And as you can see, the area is broken up into these various blocks of land that we are envisioning really as part of the planning process. So maybe we could go to the first or the next slide. And so one of the basic questions that we had here that we wanted to throw right out there is, do people want to see public access? And it seems like a fairly obvious one, but we wanted to be sure that that was kind of the same page that we were on. And obviously you can see that the response was very strong, that public access was important. There are, of course, a few people who don't want public access. And I think those folks probably lean toward, let's leave it alone and let nature take its course. But overwhelmingly, people do favor some level of public access. And so now our task is to determine what that access is and where it is. So can we go to the next slide? So let me talk about the first area that is highlighted before you. And this we indicated on our grant and in plans as a potential site for community gardens. This has been an agricultural field for a long time. You can see there's a line down the middle of it. That's a bit of a stream channel. It's got a fairly wet area down the middle. We initially put forth the idea that this could be a location for community gardens. And there's a couple reasons for that. It's relatively well-drained, good soils, and it's accessible from the rail trail. And one of the early thoughts was maybe people would want to access a community garden from the rail trail. This is just one idea for this part of the property, though, and we are open to other thoughts. And as we move through the process, other ideas may come up. But if we can go to the poll results. So there was strong support for the community garden idea. As you can see, it's over 60% thought this was something they'd like to see. But there was also some question about it as well. And I think those questions that are raised were very valid. And that is this the best place for community gardens in terms of access and water and the infrastructure needed for community gardening? And would people actually go from the rail trail to a community garden? Is that a practical idea? So this is one that really gave us some pause and something to think about. I'd also point out that community gardens are not exactly focus of the Mohawk Hudson Land Conservancy. So we would probably need to find a partner to help guide us on how this goes. The obvious, the experts in that area would be Capital Roots, and we'll talk to them about the practicalities and what it would take to do this. But so that's sort of the leading thought for this, but we've also tossed out other ideas such as pollinator habitat and some other things that could occur there. So that's the poll results for that. And if we can move to the next slide. This is a drawing just to give people an idea of what that concept might look like. These are really just to spur people's imagination, and we have a great artist on staff who developed this. But again, this idea raises a lot of questions of the practicality of it, but it is something we definitely plan to explore further and see where we can bring this and see what other concepts and ideas come up. So I think we'll move on now to Adam.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks, everybody. So the next area is what we're calling the forested trails area, and you can see it's adjacent to the community gardens area Mark just talked about. This area is bisected by the rail trail and connected with an old bridge over the what's now the rail trail, formerly the railroad. The area is probably the most substantially forested on the property, and many of the thoughts right now are kind of leaning toward maintaining a light footprint, a light touch, and looking more at walking and biking and those types of lower impact uses, but still maintaining public accessibility in this part of the property. Advance the slide here. So for this area, this was also kind of borne out in the poll responses as well, with a pretty good percentage of respondents favoring walking trails, some biking trails, and also walking, and a combination of kind of walking and biking trails. In some of the other responses that we got, folks expressed the desire, for less clearing of this area, again keeping with that lighter footprint, and also indicated that other values are important here, such as for wildlife habitat. Go to the next area. So this next question and section focuses on the bridge itself, and the bridge really is an important and kind of very visible and familiar feature, and it's important in terms of maintaining connectivity, between the northerly smaller portion and the larger southerly portion of the farm property. It pretty much does provide the only access across the rail trail in that area, given the topography and the way the railroad was cut through there. One of the things that we asked about was the sort of the future of the bridge and what types of work should be done on that, keeping in mind that it is an important feature. So if we go to the poll results here, the question was about the vision of the trail here, and specifically, should the bridge be refurbished? in order to maintain connectivity. And I think most people were interested for several reasons, because it's an important feature, but just on the landscape that about half or 55%, and then also others because it's kind of a long-term feature or historic feature there. The some of the concerns that we received in the narrative, the other responses focused on things like the capital costs as well as the long-term maintenance costs associated with any with the Conservancy essentially touching that bridge. Our kind of the emerging vision here is that it is needed in order to make sure that there is connectivity. As I just mentioned, the steep slopes there make it really difficult to provide another means of crossing of the trail. Also to maintain the northerly part of the farm property. One of the things that makes the bridge a complex feature of the farm is, its ownership. It was most likely installed over the railroad by the prior owners, and with the Albany County taking over the abandoned, the former rail right of way, it's not exactly clear who's the ownership and some of those issues. There's going to need to be some work and some collaboration in terms of any projects or any activities involving the bridge. And Mark's going to talk a little bit more about the bridge and the next steps section in a little bit. The next area is what we're calling the front fields. And this area is probably the most visible to those passing by the property, both from 85 and 85A. It's comprised mainly of open fields, having been farmed, historically and used for that purpose. And it's kind of situated in that easterly central portion, just north of the this out parcel here. So when we go to the questions and responses, what in terms of the vision, we saw kind of a fairly even distribution of interest from those that responded. So, everything from various kinds of ag to small scale demonstration, habitat restoration projects, small scale ag, again, community gardens, keeping it or opening up to grazing animals, and and then leaving it as it is, and maybe having a lighter management touch on there. In the other section, again, these comments have been illuminating, and this is no exception. One of the most of the narrative responses focused again on kind of having a lighter footprint, and with some respondents, expressing a concern about the agricultural footprint and the intensity of any future ag operations there. One of the other things that that the Conservancy is looking at is doing small scale land management demonstration. So that in that area it would focus on or could focus on early successional management strategies and activities around early successional habitat, and then also wetland area, extending some of the wetland and wetter parts of that section, as wetland creation areas. Among the other, and jumping back to the other comments, some folks were interested again in kind of pollinator habitat there. And I think Mark is also going to talk in the next steps about some of the ongoing activities around this section. So let me go to the next slide here. And I believe turn it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Adam. So the next section that we're going to discuss here is the one that we call the habitat restoration area. This is just beyond and kind of drops down in the back of the property towards the rail trail. It's about 66 acres and is currently open fields for the most part. The soils here tend to be pretty wet. And so this is why we thought it would be a great spot for habitat restoration. With really wet, heavy soils, water's already sort of naturally pooling here, and creating some wet meadow or some other great habitat for birds, for pollination habitat, and other wildlife could be really a great fit here. So we asked the public about this particular location in the next slide. What would you like to see here? And so you can see that restored wetlands and places to walk is the blue piece that people were really interested in. The demonstration area for land management techniques was green, and then community park with stopover views of the hellerbirds was the yellow. Keeping it the same was the teal bit, and then other responses in this area included just making sure, again, a light touch on the land. It's really interesting. The public is really interested in ensuring that the property stays as open space, which we were really surprised by, but delighted by in the same vein. So that'll take us to actually a poll question that we have for you. So if you could advance to the next slide. This is just a quick rendition of what it could look like if we did some habitat restoration, if we did some mild flooding to get some water in there, provide habitat not only for birds, but other wildlife like amphibians, maybe it's vernal pools, depending on how much water the soil could hold. We've talked about the possibility of creating a berm and really creating a good sized pond that could look possibly like this. Of course, having nature interpretive panels, ways for the public to get outside, bird, and enjoy nature would definitely be a part of this if that is the route that we decide to go. So in the next slide, the next portion of the property is actually where the existing agricultural buildings are located. And bear with me here as I pull up this poll question for you all. So I just launched it. Hopefully you can see it. And so what it's asking everyone is, if we were to redevelop the original farm site, so this site has already been developed, there are existing buildings there that you can see a little bit, what would you like to see there? So feel free to take a moment and tap your answer into the poll that's up on the screen. There are a couple of options there. We also say none of the above. So let us know what you think. We have about 30 participants on the screen, and so I'd love for you all to just give us some instant feedback of what your thoughts and feelings are about some of these potential options for this small portion of the property. So the farmstead area is about 4 acres. The original farmhouse was located there. It's no longer there. There's still some buildings, and Mark will talk about next steps for those buildings at the end. They're fallen down at this point. So people are, I'm still watching the poll kind of jump up and down, and I'll share that with you in just a minute, just giving folks, we've got 22 out of 26 people participating. Few more are chiming in, so just give you another minute there to go ahead and click your preference in there. We really appreciate the instant feedback too. This is a good way for us to interact with you during the webinar. So, all right. just one more moment here. We've got 25 out of 26 that have participated. Just want to make sure everybody gets a chance to click on their gut feeling on this one. Great. So here are the results that I'll share with you so you can see them now. So 25 out of 26, so 96% of you responded. It looks like 28% was interested in an education center there. 36% with us having our offices and our education center there. One of our dreams is being in a location that represents who we are and what we do. And that was one of the ideas when we went to Bender Melon Farm was, wouldn't it be so nice if we could be located here and show the landscape and the work that we do. A meeting pavilion, you know, there's so many, especially meeting outside is so important right now. It might be in the future. 20% of you were interested in that. And 16% said none of the above. And, you know, again, that's jiving with the leaving it natural trend that we've seen. So I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you so much for that feedback. It's really helpful. And we'll take that into consideration. I really appreciate that. So we're going to go to our next slide. And this was one question we wanted to ask folks, you know, as we build out and look at this vision and you all help us to, you know, develop it and make it into this great community asset, how often would you go? And, you know, we were really excited to see that people would go monthly, weekly, some people only yearly, but that folks would be really excited to be out on the property and participate in getting outside on Bender Melon Farm, which I think is just really exciting and one of the great things that we hope we can turn this into for the community to go outside and enjoy. So we'll take a look at the next slide. So this is a jumble of words, but it actually has some meaning. So what this is what we call a word cloud, and each chunk of words are all of the responses from all the questions that the public provided to us. Those words that are large are ones that came up repeatedly throughout the survey. So many people talked about trails. So you can see trails is pretty large. Bridge, community gardens is large. Community, people, nature, grassland birds. You know, so some of these are really interesting things that kept coming up over and over again. And I just wanted to share that a little bit is to show you some of the trends. The other thing I want to address in the next slide are those other questions. So in every opportunity, we provided people to provide us some feedback that wasn't really within the options we provided. So we said, you could put another comment in there related to this. And here's some of the things that came up time and again. Having sidewalk connections. So Mark had mentioned the Hilton Barn Park. And how close it is and walkable to the Voorheesville and some of the communities nearby. Having some sidewalk connections to make it safe to walk to the Hilton Barn area and our trail access that could eventually be there someday was of interest, which I thought was great. Also at pollinator habitat, and I know everybody's mentioned that throughout the presentation, but it's really wonderful how much the public is on board with pollinator habitat and sees the benefits of it. And this property, I think, has a lot of potential to be able to provide pollinator habitat because of the old existing agricultural soils that are there. Another comment that came up time and again in that other column was additional biking on the trails, not just limiting it to the forested areas, but allowing it and multi-use sort of throughout the entire property, which is something that's under consideration. Some folks were interested in the opportunity for archaeological exploration, so be able to maybe see before the 1900s what was going on the property and do some digs and things like that, which was very interesting. And of course, we already mentioned the planting of Bender melons and the challenges with that. But I really think that it's great that folks are so interested in not only helping us frame this out, but paying homage to the history there. And I think whatever we do come up with, the story of Bender melons will be a part of that for sure. So with that, I have one more poll question for you, I believe. Can I just have you advance the slide for me, please, to make sure I'm in the right spot? So let me go ahead and do this, what we learned slide. Sorry about that. I'm all excited about the poll questions because it's fun to see you all respond so quickly. So summary of results and the plan refinement. So we've gone through the results. We're sharing them with you today. We're going to, as a committee, go back and sit down and refine that. We have a few things that we're going to do in the immediate to ensure safety, and Mark's going to talk about that in next steps. And we're really going to be working on forming that vision of a natural space for recreation and wildlife based on this feedback, because the community helped us acquire this property, and we want to make sure that we're doing our best to give something back to the community as a result of their really incredible support for this project. You can see at the bottom, there are a couple different ways to stay engaged. The story map that you read initially will be continuously updated on our website, so please visit. Bender Melon Farm Preserve is now on our preserve list on the website, which is very exciting. You can also support MHLC. You can get updates through our e-news and our newsletter. And then there are also volunteer opportunities. We have opened our first trail at Bender Melon, which Mark will talk about in a little bit. And we're always looking for volunteers to assist with that. And we may need volunteers in the future as we develop more trails and exciting opportunities for the public to get out on the land. If we haven't answered one of your questions, or you have a burning thing that you want to share with us that you don't want to during the Q&A section of the webinar this evening, there's an email address right there for you, mhlc@mohawkhudson.org. Please send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. So this does take us to our next poll question, which is the next slide. And so we're just asking you all, how would you like us to communicate the progress on this project to you all? Do you want to hear about it in our e-news? Would you like to see it on Instagram pop up in your feed as you follow us, or on Facebook? And would you like to just check back on the website? So take a minute, please. You can put in multiple choices. So if you like all three of those options, feel free to click them all. Again, we've got about 26 people that are participating, and I'm seeing the polls dance right now. So everybody's putting their preferences in. We want to make sure that we're keeping you up to date on our progress. So let's just give that a minute. You guys go ahead and click away, and I'll share the results in just a second. Great, so there are the results from the poll. You can see that most people want to have the e-news, so we do have a monthly e-news that we share. You can email your email address to us to sign up for that e-news. Social media was a little less than half of the participants, and people are excited to see more information on our website as well. So thanks so much for that information. That's really helpful for us so we can keep you up to speed. Now I'm going to pass it back to Mark to talk about next steps.
Great, thank you, Sarah. So I want to touch on a couple of items and talk about some next steps. One thing, as we talked about this, I did want to point out that we are not against Bender Melons by any means. And one of the interesting things that happened along the way as we were raising the funds to get the Bender Melon farm is we found a person, I think he was in Michigan or Minnesota, that had actually collected Bender Melon seeds. We had a very restricted supply, but we did provide some to various people, and they successfully grew a few Bender Melons, not as many as you might hope, but they hopefully will save some seeds, and maybe there will be some opportunity to have at least some demonstration of what a Bender Melon is like. But let me talk about next steps for a second. I think I want to preface the next steps comments by saying that I want to, I guess it would be called lower expectations a little bit, in that all of these steps are going to take some time. We've got some dates in here, and we hope that we'll meet those dates, but I do always fall back to that we are a really small organization that's taking on a very big task. And so we'd appreciate any your patience, and this is a long-term thing. This property is going to be here forever, and we're going to be adjusting and working on it for a long time. But we have had some great next steps, and why don't we jump to the next slide, and I'll run through some of those. The first of those has already happened, and it was just a couple of weeks ago. that we opened the first trail, and this is called David's Trail. It is named that in honor of David Island, and the Island family were huge supporters of the project, and were anxious to see us get some public access, and we wanted to get people able to visit the property and experience a little of it. And so they sponsored the creation of this first trail. The trail is accessed currently from either the parking lot at the Hilton Barn or the parking lot that's at the corner or the curve on Route 85A. There's a big parking area there, and you can wander in from there. And there's a couple of signs that'll lead you to David's Trail. I encourage you to check it out. A lot of people have seen it already, and it's a very attractive little trail. It's about a half-mile walk, but the feedback on it has been incredibly positive, and that's really been helpful to us to encourage us toward next steps and to keep going. So ultimately, that trail will connect to lots of other trails and become a much bigger public asset. But right now, that's our first sort of, maybe you could call it a teaser of getting the experience of the Bender Melon property. And that will be also connected to the rail trail. And we're working with both the town of New Scotland and Albany County to create a link to the rail trail and some signage so you can easily see where that is. So please go out and take a look at David's Trail when you have a chance. You can also enjoy the trail that the town of New Scotland has created on the Hilton Park at the same time. So can we have the next slide there? One thing that I have tried religiously to point out to people throughout this whole process is there is a bit of a sacrifice here in preserving the property. The property is approximately 195 acres, give or take. The rail trail kind of distorts the acreage a little bit, but we have said all along that a part of the property would be sold in order to allow some commercial development. And this has two purposes. One is that we wanted to be able to afford to acquire the property. And so we knew we would need to raise some money from the sale. But more importantly, or as I should say, as important, the town of New Scotland, following the big box fight, debacle, whatever you'd like to call it, rezoned the property. And their vision for the town and their master planning indicated that the intersection of 85 and 85A was to be their hamlet zone. They really see that as a town center. New Scotland is a fairly small town, relatively undeveloped, very little commercial area. And as most of us know, towns are very dependent on their commercial tax base. And so there was a concern that we took too much of the potential commercial area of the town. And so as a compromise, and I think something that's compatible with the preservation of the remainder of the property, we are, for lack of a better term, sacrificing this area, which will be sold. It's under contract. I will point out that an awful lot of the site is fairly wet, and it's a little hard to see on this map, but there is a strip along what would be the east side of the property. So that would be your right side on your screen. There's a strip there that we are maintaining as our ownership that is both buffered to a small tributary of the Philippenkill stream, which originates this is one area of the headwaters of the Philippenkill. There are others, but this is an important one. So that creates some buffer there, and additional wetlands on the property are going to create additional buffer. So I would not expect to see that 20 acres be developed. I think only a relatively small portion, probably half or less, will actually be utilized. And the zoning will very much guide how that is developed, and is quite strict and presents some real challenges to developers with a good purpose of coming out with the best result. So again, this is an important thing to recognize, and we have tried to make people very aware of this so that there are no surprises. But we expect we'll be before the planning board this month, and we expect that will close in the next few weeks, to hopefully weeks, maybe in the next few months, but we're going for weeks. If I could have the next slide also, thank you. One of the things that is really critical in our view of this property is the need to clean up the property. After Charles Bender conveyed the property on to to the Taylors, and it was referred to as the Taylor Farm. There were a lot of structures. Bender had really developed out his property. That picture all the way to the left was a large chicken coop. There were barns, there were greenhouses, literally thousands of little tiny greenhouses that were put over each melon plant so that they could survive the relatively difficult environment we have here for growing melons. And so Bender had to set up a lot of different buildings, and then the Taylors had also set up a lot of structures. And so we're left with a lot of refuse that is relatively dangerous, and as you can see, in pretty poor condition. So the top priority for us is to clean those up and make it safe. And that is one reason we're not sort of allowing people kind of unfettered access to the property, because these things present a lot of attractive nuisances and liability dangers for us. So number one priority above all is to make this safe. Now, I will say there is one building that survives. It's not depicted in any of these images, but there is a small building that we hope to restore and probably use for the storage of equipment that we'll use to maintain the trails and other things on the property. So we do hope we can save one of the structures, but as you can see in the images, most of the structures are really too far gone for any kind of restoration or repair. The building on the left-hand side at the end of the chicken coop, that looks relatively intact in the picture, but you're really seeing a facade. There's nothing behind that frontage there. So property cleanup, we expect to happen this winter. We're waiting for the ground to freeze. The site around the buildings is very, very wet. And so we don't want to do a lot of damage to the site when we go in to do this cleanup. And a key part of the sale of the commercial property that I described in the previous slide is to fund this cleanup. Right now, the estimates are at least $50,000 of cleanup. So it's a big undertaking, and it's one we want to be careful with and do as best we can, but make the site safe. So that is kind of the number one priority, to eliminate the risks that presents to the public and to anybody who's on the property. So if I could have the next slide. Another really top priority in our minds is the bridge. And again, this goes back to the safety issue, but I think it's really more than the safety issue. And you see on the right side of your screen a depiction of the bridge, again, done by Carrie Stricken of our staff, of what that bridge could look like. And I really see this as potentially sort of a centerpiece of the property. If the bridge goes over the rail trail, many of you are probably aware of it and may have wondered why it's there and what its history is. As Adam alluded to, we don't know a lot about the history, but it is, despite the appearance in the photo that you're looking at, it's a fairly substantial structure. It's built sort of to railroad standards, which are very high standards. And our initial reviews of the property and the look by some engineers, everyone is of the opinion that this is a very, very solid structure and could be restored at relatively low cost. What that cost, what low is a matter of opinion, but we're thinking that, and the opinions that we've received so far are in the $50,000 to $100,000 range, which is a big lift, but we think there's a lot of folks that can help reduce that cost. And there's been a lot of interest. The county has expressed a lot of interest. We've got a bridge company that's expressed interest. Basically, what it appears to need is a deck and maybe some safety railings on the side to prevent people from throwing things over. But that bridge could lead to trails on the north portion of the property, which is roughly 45 acres, and bring you to the rest of the trails on the property and all the other concepts and ideas that we've talked about. So I really see this as a very visible centerpiece of the project. It's very close to David's Trail. So it could be an asset. The trick right now that we have to figure out is whose bridge is it? We are pretty confident that it is on county property and is totally within the rail trail right of way, but there's just no historical evidence of who owned it, what it was built for, and who has rights to it. So that's a discussion we are engaged with Albany County on, And we're hoping for some progress on it. It depending on how those conversations go and lots of other factors that come into play on this, we'll see how quickly we can get it done. But I'm optimistic that within a year or so, we can have some progress on making this a very usable and nice feature on the property. So I think we can go to the next slide at this point. Haven't been sitting on our hands this whole time since we've owned the property. We've been going out there with various consultants and agencies, and we feel a very important agency for us is the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And these are folks that provide guidance and funding for agricultural activities and fields and restoration of fields. They've toured the property with us and have expressed a lot of enthusiasm for things like creating pollinator habitat, wetland restoration, and some of the other aspects of this that we've talked about. So we see a really strong potential for working with NRCS to implement some of their project or some of their programs on the land that could have some huge environmental benefits. One of the things about Bender Melon that if you take a walk around and look at it, the soils have been really abused over the years. There's about 20 continuous years of corn that were grown on the property. So there's been a real depletion of the soil quality. And even in the first year of letting the property alone and letting it be fallow, we've seen a lot of things spring back, and that's something that people like NRCS and Cooperative Extension and some of the consultants we've talked to have noticed, is that there's a lot of things that want to grow out there, some of which are invasive and some of which are interesting natives. And so we want to do the best job we can to make those fields that aren't going to be used for something else, make them the best habitat we can. And NRCS could be a really important partner for us in doing that. So we're excited about the possibilities there as well. I think that brings us to the end of our slides and the presentation in general. But I would really want to thank all the folks who supported the project, who give their time and interest and have made this whole thing possible. Because when this big box fight was going on and through the years, this has always been a dream to preserve this property and really keep Slingerlands and Voorheesville from gradually sort of merging as just residential sprawl. And so we have a huge opportunity before us, and your help and support and ideas are what's going to make this a successful project. And so we really look forward to working with you all and appreciate your time and input. So I think at this point, Sarah, if we have any questions, a few questions that we could answer before running too long. We don't want to keep you very long, but we can, if there's some questions that we have that we want to address. Sarah, do you want to?
Yeah, I think some of them you answered in that last couple of slides. So thanks for doing that. There is one that someone mentioned, can the boards and stuff be repurposed? So this popped up when we were talking about removal of the old structures. And they asked if there'd be a business interested in taking the lumber for reclamation, or if there's some other option, an HGTV show. Could you imagine that? That'd be fun.
That would be
Reclaim my barn. Maybe we could make one. So there you go.
Well, I will mention the barn in the picture on the screen. That's the one we think we can restore and is in the best condition. So there is an interest in doing that. But on that particular structure, tying into the question, we did see where someone else decided that those boards would be great for restoration, and they took all of the siding as high as they could reach. So it's about up to 7 feet. You can see the siding is all gone. So that someone felt they need to use some of those boards and use them that way. We have reached out to, at this point, 2 different organizations that do restoration type woodworking. There's one right in Voorheesville called the Old Goat, if you're looking for some old timbers and things. And so far the answer has been fairly negative, and I'm a little disappointed in that the amount of work and effort it takes to pull out those boards and make them usable for other purposes has been too much for people to want to take on. I'm not ready to throw in the towel on that yet. We will try to find some others, because You know, if you've bought lumber, lumber is so expensive, and aged lumber is so compelling that you would hope that someone would want that. But so far we haven't seen it. I'll also mention on the lumber front that none of the structures that are out there indicate any hand-hewn beams or anything that's really old. Most of this is 19th century forward, so they're all sawn boards. But there are some nice boards out there that we would love to see reused and recycled, but it just may not prove to be practical if there's no one that's willing to take that on.
All right, we've got another question in the Q&A. Just a little context before I ask the question. You guys may recall there is a historical sign along 85A, and there is a bit of a road in there. So the question is, what will happen to the road leading to the former Taylor's house?
Great question. I'll address that. You know, our vision right now is that we would like to improve that road so that it's more usable. It's very much a farm road, difficult to drive in without four-wheel drive. I've done it in my car. It's a mistake. So it is going to take some restoration, but we see that happening as a part of the cleanup of those structures that we addressed earlier. Those structures need to be removed, and that's going to take some heavy equipment going in and out of there, which is going to require some improvement of that road. Ultimately, right now, we are envisioning that as our primary access to the property. Currently, we're dependent on access from the Route 85 parking area that's very visible as you drive on 85, and from the Hilton Barn, both of which are controlled by the town of New Scotland. And they are great partners, so that's not a problem. And we will probably continue to use those as access points. But if we think about some of the ideas that we've presented here for reuse of the barn and farmstead site, even if we just did a pavilion there, we would need a driveway into that. But I think in the near term, we're envisioning a driveway in there, excuse me, and that leading to parking, which would then lead you to some of the trails on the interior of the property. So we see that right now as probably our primary access to the site and the public's primary access down the road once we can make it more usable.
Great. I'm just scrolling through. Folks are very kindly typing in the Q&A.
Okay.
So someone asked, does anyone know if the bridge was in fact a railroad bridge or trestle? And if so, could it simply be restored as is, keeping the same look, which will be consistent with the rail trail?
That's a great question. And if anybody out there knows any history of the bridge, please reach out and share it. We've been asking, you know, there's a lot of real rail enthusiasts out there and train spotters, and we've been asking everyone for a history on it. All that we know so far is that the bridge was constructed for access between two pieces of property that were divided when the railroad went in, which I think was 1868 that it finally opened. And so the bridge allowed passage because it's very steep in there. And so the railroad was dividing someone's property. It's not even clear whose property it was at that point. There's suggestion that it was Hilton, who was a fairly well-known local celebrity war hero type fella, and there was another name that I may get it wrong, Hernick, or I think it was Hernick, which was a well-known farm on Font Grove Road. I've probably not gotten his name quite right, but it may have been constructed for them. Again, unclear. But it was not for railroad purposes. It was for farming and for access. And so the railroad built it, but they didn't build it for trains. They built it for access. And we know one of the only things that we think we know, and I can't say this with too much assurance, but an early survey of the property shows that there was a bridge there in 1925 that burned. So initially it was probably wood, and at some point, someone rebuilt it. It looks very much like the railroad did. There is a lot of speculation that it was built using parts from what's called a turntable, which was located in Delancey, where you could allow trains to pull onto this large swivel kind of structure and send them off on different tracks. Delancey had a very famous turntable that was retired. And so that left a lot of big steel that the railroad may have used for this bridge. We don't know what the case is, but going to the look idea and how that might appear when and if we get this turned into something else, I would agree. I think we would want it very much to reflect the history of the railroad. And I don't see us changing the look really at all, other than maybe cleaning up and getting rid of graffiti. But otherwise, I don't think you'll see a dramatically different look. We may have to do some fencing, as I mentioned earlier, along the sides to keep the threat of people dropping or accidentally or on purpose things down onto the rail trail. But other than that, I don't see the look changing an awful lot. You know, we could do an awful lot of different things with it. Maybe the Art on the Rail Trail Committee would like to do a mural on it or something like that. But the basic structure, I think, is intact. So all we are really thinking of is a deck and sides to make it safe.
So it's 8 o'clock right now, but we do have 3 more questions in the chat that I think could be answered pretty quickly if everybody's willing to hang in with us here for just a quick second. So somebody asked, will the commercial space be attached to the other commercial enterprises so everything is connected?
That's a great question. It's a little hard for us to predict how the commercial space would be utilized. We're not, we're not commercial developers, so we don't know exactly how they'll use it. Our hope is that the town will be play a critical role in that and will help prescribe how it is utilized. We want to see connectivity. We endorse and appreciate their effort to create sort of the hamlet type development that could occur there. So I think it will be connected, but there's an awful lot of unknowns because the adjoining properties, Fred the Butcher, the new piece the new structure that's going in now, and then the stone well make up that whole corner. They are all owned independently by different individuals. So it's a little outside of our realm of influence how they connect and how well that's integrated. But there was mentioned early on in one of the poll questions of sidewalks. We are really hopeful that we'll all be connected with sidewalks, and we would love to see the property, the commercial area, as integrated as possible with what we're doing. And so that, the businesses that will occur there would possibly utilize the Bender Melon Preserve and maybe connect to the trails. So we hope the whole thing is integrated well, but that is largely a function of town planning and the people that will ultimately own it and their visions.
Great. 2 more quick questions. One is, has there been any thought about adding a dog park?
I can't say there's been a lot of thought. All I can say, Sarah, you want to address what we do on preserves? I don't want to dominate all the questions here, but you want to tell them what we do on our preserves and how dogs are treated there?
Yeah, so generally we encourage dogs to be leashed at all times on our preserves for a couple of different reasons. One is to avoid dogs from interacting with other dogs who may not do well with other dogs. We've had some issues with people who have had their dogs on leashes attacked by unleashed dogs. But also the wildlife can be really disrupted by dogs that are running freely on the preserve. And so keeping dogs on a leash kind of keeps everybody in balance. It keeps the dogs in balance with each other. It keeps the dogs in balance with the surrounding wildlife, and kind of keeps everybody in harmony. So that's what we encourage folks to do, is to have their dogs on a leash on our preserves. We generally don't add fencing to where we work. It can impede wildlife movement and things like that. I think that a dog park could be a potential for this site, but oftentimes we focus a lot more on sort of open space and natural areas that wouldn't necessarily have chain link fencing for a space where a dog could run. I think I could envision a dog running across a field for a Frisbee without a chain link fence around it. But that's really up to Mark to decide if that is.
Hey, wait a minute. Yeah, I don't see us in the business of dog parks, to be quite blunt about it. They're a great thing and they're wonderful for dog owners, but I think it'll be treated like our other preserves. And as Sarah said, dogs on leashes, But I don't foresee that, but everything's on the table as well.
One last question. It says you provided single option responses to the question about the farmstead refurbishment area. Can't that 4 acres be used for more than one option?
That's an excellent point, and it certainly can. And there's really one of the beauties of our organization and our approach to things is I think we can be very open-minded to a variety of uses. And so we want to hear ideas on it. We've presented a small range of ideas, but there are certainly other possibilities, and we'd love to hear about those. So that's definitely yet to be determined. As I said before, the first step is to clean it up and make it safe, and then also assess what the limitations of the location are. I alluded to this earlier. It's extraordinarily wet in that area, and we're not entirely sure what's going on with that. There's several dug wells and some wetlands. So there's NRCS was walking and immediately said, boy, there's an excellent place for a pond there. So that's another possibility. But I'd love to hear ideas, and I think we're all very open to what could be done there and what the possibilities are. So that's to be determined. And I'll say that the wetness has been, I think, surprising to all of us as we've walked the property the various times we visit and as we look at it. It's a very wet area. The soils don't drain very well. And so the wetness is going to constrain some of our activities, and we're not going to take on things that are going to really disturb the area or make it something that it doesn't want to be. So that may prescribe some of how this portion of the property is used. But please share your ideas. We'd love to hear them, and we will be as responsive as we can be.
So there were a few last minute questions that I typed back. I hope folks don't mind, but I do want to remind everyone that the Q&A is captured as part of this recording. So we will have this wonderful treasure trove of everyone's comments and questions in the Q&A. So if we didn't answer them live, we do have them in the recording. So we have all of this in one neat package that we can review as we work on formulating more plans for Bender Melon Farm Preserve.
And feel free to reach directly to us too, because we want to be responsive and we want to make this the best we can make it.
I want to take a quick second to thank the Bender Melon Farm Committee for all of their extra time this evening to help with this presentation, putting it together, but also helping guide us through the story map. We had to get some GIS help and some SurveyMonkey help. And so, these folks are donating their time, volunteering their time to help with this effort. And I just really want to thank them for going above and beyond to create this really cool tool to reach out and get this I think, a unique opportunity to gain public feedback.
And I want to thank all of the people who participated and have followed this and are enthusiastically watching. And we'd love to hear more from you. And thank you all to the committee. You guys have been great. And this has been a new and exciting adventure for us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Good night.